To kick things off, welcome to ICUJP. Most recently, our new board member, McGregor Eddie, picked up on the cadence. ICU, Justice and Peace. So that's our name, carefully chosen over 23 years ago. I am Steve Rohde. I'm proud to be chair of this amazing group, which has done this work for over 23 years, meeting every Friday morning with a few exception for holidays, presenting over 1,000 webinars on important topics, keeping people informed in ways that they don't see on the mainstream corporate media. Personally, I am holding up the Sonoma chapter of ICUJP up here and am active with the Black Jewish Justice Alliance, Death Penalty Focus, and Bend the Arc, a Jewish Partnership for Justice. So let's turn to Rebecca for our reflection.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. I'm going to be reading today from this book of prose and poetry from Palestinian poet Rifat Al-Lir. The book is If I Must Die. So Ryan Grimm had started a campaign to make this book uh, a New York Times bestseller, and I think he succeeded. And I participated in the campaign and bought a couple of copies and end of last year. It was just delivered a couple of days ago. But so Rifat Al-Lir, he was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza on December 6, 2023. But he wrote a very famous poem, If I Must Die. And I'm sure most of you have probably heard that poem. And it was written for his daughter. And so I'm not going to read that poem because it's very long, but I do want to read here that it describes that he was that Israel decided that it could no longer let Rifat write back from Gaza. A missile targeted Rifat in his sister's apartment, killing him along with his sister, brother, and four of his nephews and nieces. So, some 5 months later, on April 26, 2024, an Israeli airstrike killed Rifat's beloved daughter, Shaima, along with her husband and baby. So, what I wanted to read to you from this book is his last message. He transcribed, he made voice recordings, messages, and so they transcribed a lot of those messages that he left behind. His last message on December 4th, 2023 was the Democratic Party and Biden are responsible for the Gaza genocide perpetrated by Israel. Another transcription from his voice recordings is titled "I Teach English Poetry." So this one I am going to read. I teach English poetry this term, and I have 200 students. I posted an announcement on our Facebook group telling them I'm sorry that I can't help enough. I can't protect them as I should be a teacher protecting his students. And I asked them to write poetry, Arabic, and English articles. And I did help some of them publish articles and pieces and poems as part of my role as a teacher, despite me being extremely under pressure, having my home and my building bombed and having to evacuate to many places and shelters. I usually summarize my policy as to quote Hamlet, I must be cruel to be kind. Tough love. I tell my students, I'm tough because I love you. I care about you. I want you to be better students. So I work them hard in terms of attendance and assignments and tasks and exams. Many students fear me generally in life. In university, even outside, they're usually cautious, despite the fact that I try to be as friendly as possible. But again, a tough teacher is always feared in a way. I am queuing at the bakery, and one of my students insisted on giving me his place. And I insisted never, because Israel made everybody equal. He's killing everybody. He's starving everybody, making everybody suffer almost the same. I would never take your place. I learned from this student this beautiful gesture of offering me his place, because offering me his place meant I could save an hour or more. And sometimes you could queue for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours, by the way, and when you get close, they run out of bread. So that's a big sacrifice. Later on, I met another student of mine. I was queuing way ahead. He came heading to the back of the line, and I met him, and I insisted on giving him my place as a reaction to that student offering his place. He was shocked and he said, "No, there's no way." I said, "I insist." Of course, he didn't take the place. He refused, but again, the gesture, the message was there. I'm sure he would do the same for others. Learn by example, by role models. So I wanted to read that as a inspiration and hope for because I know he can't move forward. We just have what he left behind in his writings, but we're here to carry on the message, to carry on hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's so important to remember these heroes. Thank you. Well, let's turn to our main speaker for the day, and Rick will introduce John.
Yeah. So we've been very lucky in the last few years to be able to invite John Parker to speak to us. And a lot of the reason for that is the work that he's done and the work that he is doing at the Harriet Tubman Center in LA. And I put a link tree in the chat for people to find out more about the organization, things that are going on, their social media posts. There are a few places like this in Los Angeles that are essentially the conscience and the workplace of the progressive movement. And one of them definitely is the Harriet Tubman Center. And a lot of John's work recently, a focus, he was part of the U.S. delegation in the World Conscience Convoy in Egypt, attempting to send aid and journalists to Gaza and to explore the U.S. complicity in Israeli genocide. He was previously the Socialist Unity Party and Peace and Freedom Party congressional candidate on the ballot in California. And he's also been a union organizer, public school teacher, and I just referenced his work with the Harriet Tubman Center. Anytime we can find out more about the world that we live in, with that as a unfiltered and totally honest appraisal of where we are, is a very welcome opportunity. So, John, thank you very much. The floor is yours, and everybody else, if you can go on mute, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you, as usual. It's an honor to be here. Hope I'm speaking loud enough and stuff here. What's going on here? It's just interesting about the one thing about the Guantanamo, the 30,000 folks, population. Trump wants to increase the population in Guantanamo by 30,000. And so anyway, I'd love to be the Harriet Tubman Center. Would love to endorse the action and sponsor, and we'll try to get folks out on Tuesday. Like I said, it's an honor to be doing this kind of work, especially now. And yesterday, there was an event with folks from many organizations, about 30 or 35 organizations, um, uh, creating a coalition called the Self-Defense Community Coalition. And the first, there's been Zoom meetings, but this was the first in-person meeting at the Echo Firehouse, right? I always can get that wrong. With about 300 people there. So this is going to be a large event where people can, feel power. And like the Southern California Immigration Coalition and the coalitions in 2006 and other things, it's time, and people are ready. They're not afraid of Trump. They're going to fight back, and we're seeing that. And Trump, Trump is going back in time, and he is. Let's see, it's 6-7. I'm going to make sure I get my right time here. So yeah, Trump is going back in time. He's bringing back reaction, bringing that to the forefront with the Monroe Doctrine 2.0. And he says Gaza will belong to the U.S. Lots of profit making, exploiting jobs and hotels and more, and the spoils of genocide and our latest Holocaust against the Palestinian people and land is what he hopes to profit from. So we should not be surprised about the shocking things we see and hear. Given U.S. history, in 1823, the United States announced the Monroe Doctrine, saying, "America for the Americans," meaning the United States. And since then, the military intervention and regime subversion, the blockade of Cuba, the overthrow of the Allende government of Chile. Then in 2003 comes the color revolutions, the Rose Revolution in Georgia, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and the Tulip Revolution. The U.S. Department of State admitted orchestrating these regime changes, and those arms agreements never get in the way of U.S. foreign policy. In 2018, it announced its exit from the UN Human Rights Council, citing the organization's bias against Israel and failure to protect human rights effectively. In 2019, the United States announced its withdrawal from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty to seek unfettered development of advanced weapons. Those opposed negotiations on a verification protocol for the Biological Weapons Convention and impeding international verification of countries' activities relating to biological weapons, became the biggest obstacle to a world free of chemical weapons. During the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the Kosovo War, the war in Afghanistan, and the Iraq War, the United States used massive quantities of chemical and biological weapons, as well as cluster bombs, fuel air bombs, graphite bombs, and depleted uranium bombs, causing enormous damage on civilian facilities and countless civilian casualties. So it should not be a surprise of how the U.S. continues its appetite in the South China Sea, which is one of the busiest and most important maritime trade routes in the world. Approximately 1/3 of global maritime oil trade passes through the region, and this equates to around 15 million barrels of oil per day. And the sea serves as a vital shipping route for oil tankers traveling from the Middle East to major markets in East Asia, particularly in China and Japan and South Korea. And in addition to oil, the South China Sea also facilitates the transport of liquefied natural gas. Now, the National Defense Strategy document of 2022 from the U.S. Secretary of Defense, and this is a document that was blessed by President Biden. Right out of the gate, it calls China Russia, Iran, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea threats to national security. And this threat must be met by making NATO even more powerful and nuclear capable, especially surrounding Russia. But in terms of priorities, the document states that China is the #1 target. And this will be done, the document declares, by provoking altercations in the Indo-Pacific region using Japan, South Korea, Australia, and any Southeast Asian countries Washington can recruit to launch a war from the South China Sea to the East China Sea. And there have been many very serious altercations in the South China Sea between the US and China due to US war games there. And as if that's not enough, the document says the US should begin training and arming Taiwan in asymmetrical warfare, or guerrilla warfare, against China. And the Monroe Doctrine's purview, therefore, we see has expanded a little bit. And now imagine if China had military exercises right on your doorstep, on the doorstep of Los Angeles, close enough for a passenger cruise ship to come into contact with the exercises. And not just your typical military exercises, but the ones that were in preparation for a coastal invasion. And imagine if China did this with 3 other countries, some of whom were promised nuclear weapons. US military exercises have come within 200 miles of China's southern coast in the South China Sea, and the provocations have increased year after year since former Presidents Obama's imperialist pivot towards Asia. It's hard to imagine such a scenario targeting the US because it doesn't exist. But for the people of China, the US is very much at the doorstep, on a daily basis. And as the National Defense Strategy outlines, these provocations will be carried out with the assistance of other collaborators of US imperialism, like Australia and Japan, Philippines, and demands the loyalty from those nations in South Korea, that forcing that there be a side that is picked, a side against China. But many of the countries will like to, who they would like to inspire in these provocations towards war, have increasingly beneficial trade relations with China. So, and this includes South Korea. Economic and cultural ties have greatly increased with the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations. Two-way trade with China, with the Southeast Asian nations, has gone from 1990, 8 billion, to now up to 2023, 900 billion. So it went from 8 billion to 900 billion. Was that 113-fold? And since it's not economically beneficial to be a loyal member of the Monroe Doctrine crowd, the US is becoming the desperate and aggressive and trying to force a confrontation using greater military arms shipments and exercises with Taiwan threatening mainland China, perhaps trying to provoke another NATO proxy war. But again, that is going to be a difficult since, as of recently, China is the largest investor of the Asian, I can't say the acronyms I have problems with, but with the Association of South Asian Nations. So they are now the largest investor of those countries, with the Belt and Road initiatives funding infrastructure, manufacturing, energy, technology, and finance. And that includes projects such as roads, railways, ports, power plants in many of those nations. And this initiative has cemented China's role as a primary investor in the region. So it's kind of hard for them to have this loyalty in the US when economically, well, maybe it's not the best thing to do. Now, just to get back, let's talk about Africa a little bit. China's President Xi pledged 1 billion vaccine doses to African countries, planning planning for an achievement of a 60% vaccination rate in Africa by 2022, and he met it. Xi announced that 600 million doses of the vaccine were donated and 400 million would be produced by joint production projects with Chinese companies and African countries, allowing a further boost in infrastructure and self-determination on the African continent. And all of these pledges were met. The relationship is also mutual in benefit. President Xi was sure to thank the African countries that helped restore China's lawful seat in the United Nations some 50 or so years ago. China also benefits from Africa's markets and the needed access to lithium, cobalt, and other minerals on the continent. So turn 180 degrees from these relationships of mutual benefit, and you land at the feet of the IMF and the World Bank, demanding austerity cutbacks from loans. Nigeria is facing the worst economic crisis, facing inflation levels not seen in almost 3 decades due to those austerity demands to ensure IMF financing. You're not going to get that IMF loan if you don't do what they say, and that's cutting back the vital the needs of the people, basic necessities. The Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 26.5 million of Nigeria's 220 million people are food insecure. The primary architects of the IMF in 1944, that's Britain and the United States, they decided that they wanted to ensure that African, Latin American, Asian self-determination would be denied. And after World War II, it allowed the United States to be in virtual control of the world economy and place the world on the US dollar rather than local currencies. And the IMF does not help build vital infrastructure of a nation. It prioritizes privatization and a dearth of social spending. In 2013, China announced the Belt and Road Initiative that allows infrastructure connecting land and sea and economic and social development of the global South. In Africa, this includes railways in Kenya, an electric railroad in Ethiopia, or hydropower stations in Uganda, or digital connections that saw 7,000% growth from 2022 and increasing engagement with the BRI countries. According to the African Policy Research Institute, many African countries ignored the U.S. pressure from the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, discouraging engagement with China. But by September 2021, it went up to 70% of the 4G base stations in Africa were constructed by the Chinese company Huawei. And this is in addition to the involvement of the other Chinese companies in constructing fiber optics across Africa, which explains why Huawei Chief Financial Officer Ming Wanzhou on December 1st, 2018, was arrested at the Vancouver International Airport by Canadian police. She was on a stopover from Hong Kong on a business trip en route to Mexico City. Well, she was accused of violating U.S. sanctions and that prohibited businesses with Iran, and was arrested and waiting extradition to the U.S. It's funny, Netanyahu, I said it right, Netanyahu, he's invited to Washington, last Tuesday, and he didn't get arrested. But it's not just the Republicans and it's not just Trump that plays God. President Clinton in 1998 shot a missile destroying the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical plant in Sudan, killing one person with injuries to others, on false claims of the plant producing VX nerve agents. This plant produced vital malaria medicine in reality for Africa. And although Clinton admitted later that the information was incorrect, the US government refused to pay for the damage and did not mind the increasing malaria deaths resulting from the action. At the 2024 summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing, China laid plans to combat malaria. According to the World Malaria Report 2023, 94% of global malaria cases and 95% of malaria deaths in 2022 occurred in Africa. Well, Chinese scientists have contributed solutions that showed a significant reduction in malaria cases and infection rates in the pilot areas after treatment. So now the World Health WHO, the World Health Organization, is working with CDC's parasitic disease teams to expand malaria projects in Tanzania, Zambia, and Senegal. Now, the Clinton bombing contributed to the spread of malaria in Africa. Well, that was answered by China's actions. And it should also be remembered that the Soviet Union and China facilitated the liberation of 17 African countries from colonialism in the 60s, providing military assistance as well. However, China, how was China? I was going to ask, how did China escape from the century of humiliation, poverty, and starvation and slavery that came about from British imperialism? In 1949, it was only 20% of the population could read in China, and the life expectancy was 35 years. China was primarily a rural peasant economy. Its working class was tiny in comparison. There was also no industrialization or education. But by 1975, the revolution had increased life expectancy to 65 years, 65.5 years. And despite the additional challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Chinese government proclaimed the eradication of extreme poverty on November 23rd, 2020. Now, the World Bank, we know the World Bank doesn't like China, or especially doesn't like the Communist Party of China. But they had to admit, they declared that China had gotten 850 million people out of poverty. They said, quote, "By any measure, the speed and scale of China's poverty reduction is historically unprecedented. With this, China has contributed close to 3/4 of the global reduction in the number of people living in extreme poverty." So China is now a world scientific power. It's built high-speed trains and affordable electric cars, reduced pollution and carbon emissions, and engaged in space exploration. The People's Republic of China's accomplishments have spanned the gamut from healthcare to education to sports. And China's revolution in 1949 threw off the chains of Britain's imperialism and allowed a planned economy built on publicly owned vital industries of transportation, fuel, electricity, and banking, allowing 850 million people to come out of extreme poverty in 30 years. Now, the threat that the U.S. has, why is the U.S. so intent on creating these provocations? Why is it so intent on building NATO? Why is China the priority? Because it's not the amount of bases that China has. I don't know if you can count one or two. I don't know how many, but I know there's over 800 of the U.S. bases all over the place, all over the world, polluting the world. The military threat of the United States is real. You can magnify all the countries in the world, and you're not going to be able to come up with the amount of money and on military and alone the profits that the military industrial complex makes, their profits went up a lot based on the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza. We saw a lot, especially in Israel. Also, the companies there as well, the military companies as well, their profits just shot up from these wars. So you wonder why. Why are what's the threat? Why China? Yeah. Well, it's not a military threat. It's an economic threat. It's an economic threat, and when you're going to threaten the profits of the IMF and the World Bank, well, that's fighting words. You can't sacrifice the profits, because this is a system that maximizes profits, and they'll do whatever they have to do to maximize those profits, even if it means polluting yourself to death, creating more climate change crises, or not being prepared for a fire in California, or not doing many other things, not providing the equipment needed for people to fight a fire, or to provide the health care to stop the unneeded, unnecessary deaths that go on year after year. So I guess the main thing we have to say is we're not going to tolerate this. We know where it goes. We knows what happens by seeing the people in Gaza and the babies and the horror that's going on. It continues to go on, and it continues. Both Democratic and Republican parties allow it, collaborate in it. We got Gaza, Trump saying he's going to take Gaza over. And we know that means they're just like in Nigeria. It's not that far away to say that that we're going to be fighting. We're going to be more food insecure. We're not going to have the healthcare we need to survive, because they need to take what we have to fuel their profits, military profits and things. So I guess from there, I guess I'll leave it there. And I guess I'll, as questions or.
Yes, thank you, John, very much. We're beginning to have questions. Let's go to John Crampner.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, John. I'm kind of struck by the paradox, I guess, that over, I think about the last 50 years or so, that U.S. Industries, and I'm sure it's encouraged by the government, have been building factories in China, employing workers there, of course, at the expense of U.S. workers. And so do you find it at all, again, paradoxical that the fading U.S. empire has built up, the Chinese nation, which it now feels the need to go to war with?
Yeah. Well, like I said, their motivation is profits, and if they felt like, well, we can get some cheap labor over there, and we can make more with our labor costs will be less and things like that. But unfortunately, I guess that countries, you might have an idea what you want to do, but it really, what's going on in the global economy, really, the capitalist global economy really set the stage. So there's only so many things you can do. China, in order to increase its industrialization and things like that, might have been doing something some folks might not have liked by having these companies come in and do this. But what they did was they said, well, these companies, this industry, these plants that you put here, guess what? After a certain amount of years, they stay here and they're ours. And they said, and the wages increased. They didn't go down. As low as they might have been, they increased, and they still continue to increase. And of course, the only Walmart that's unionized is in China. So yeah, it's just this. It's ironic that they're doing that, but they're not getting. I guess they're not getting what they wanted. But like somebody said though, the Marx quoted somebody, a union leader, I think, who said the capitalists will sell you the rope to hang themselves, to hang them.
Thank you. Don.
Yes, thank you so much. I wonder if you could speak a little bit how, with Trump pissing everybody off, how more and more South American countries are turning to China for help. I mean, how, and I think Peru is now called the little Singapore of the world, but it seems like more and more South American companies are turning to China for help on just about everything.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Belt and Road projects yeah, are not just only Africa, but also Latin America. And the investments keep increasing. They're because folks are seeing the benefit. Sometimes the loans are forgiven, but and the interest rate and the thing of investing in a country, but allowing that country to keep the industry, to build railroads, to build things that people need, like Walter Rodney said, though, the reason Africa is the way it is, it was the way it was undeveloped, because it wouldn't the colonialists wouldn't allow the infrastructure to be built or anything like that. All they did was to keep them in debt. But so if you're allowing folks to be more self-sufficient, then that's what people want. And it's interesting that that's the approach to Latin America, but the approach of the United States is a big stick all the time. And they tell even Colombian president to tell them, if you're not going to take these people we deport to you, you better take them. And the Colombian president said, no, we don't want to take them. And then he said, okay, now we got sanctions on you, 25% sanctions that's going to destroy your economy. So then he had to say, okay, bring the deported folks here. But it's that kind of stick, that kind of nasty thing. It might work for a while, but man, it's really going to turn people away from the U.S. policies and things, and they're going to look for another way. In Nigeria, I was there about 2 months ago at a decolonization forum. And there are people there that they're fighting against the IMF, and there were some youth that went to jail for, they called it treason, for being against the Nigerian government, and in Kenya as well. Well, because you're protesting against the IMF, and they said no. Some people were even, they had signs saying, we don't want the IMF, and we don't want the U.S. troops. And I said, some signs said they wanted Russia and to take over from the security things that the U.S. was doing, and take those out, and said that they just don't want the U.S. around.
Thank you, John. We're joined now by Robert Corsini. If you'd begin your question by briefly introducing yourself, Robert.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, hi, John. Glad to see you. I'm Robert Corsini. I'm a filmmaker, long time card carrying now member of ICUJP. Thanks to special decree by Stephen Rohde. I thank you for being here. I think it's such an important topic. Everyone has been flash grenade struck by the recent events. But I think what you're talking about, this dynamic about China and the global South versus the global North, is incredibly important. And who's going to fill the void now that, for example, USAID is now being dismantled. USAID has been for better or for worse. Some will argue for better, some will argue for worse. But USAID has played a vital role in the global South for since it was created, in the Kennedy administration. The Peace Corps. I was a Peace Corps volunteer at one point. I served in West Africa and Togo. I worked in a USAID project, and the joke amongst the volunteers was always, well, who is the actual CIA agent out here within the USAID group? And we never really figured out who it was. And in the end, we never did. But I think what this speaks to is that there is a two-sided thing to the AID issue. And this is kind of what I'm getting to, my long way to get to my question to you. But, AID did do a lot of good for people. I could tell you firsthand what I did there. It was part of a USAID project, and it did have a local impact, and a positive one. And the Togolese appreciated the presence. But on the other side, we realized the big stick tactic of AID was there were always strings attached to the aid. It's like, well, we're not going to give you this if you don't vote our way against the Soviet bloc and the UN. So there are always strings tied to the aid that would be spread around by AID. And while I was there, China was there, but very quietly. And I'll share this: that they would send people into Togo, and they would, for example, spend millions of dollars constructing a giant political party building in a remote part of northern Togo that was giving edifice to the fascist who was in charge at the time, Nasingbe Ayadama, in northern Togo. But that's the kind of thing. But you would never see the Chinese. They would always be very quiet. They would be kind of cloistered off into their own little camps but you would never see them around. But they were always there. There was always something going on. So I guess this is all leading to my question to you, John. What now that you're seeing AID being dismantled, is it a good thing or is that a bad thing?
Kind of ironic.
I know ironic.
Yeah, because they I wish I could remember the name. It's the Democratic. Somebody help me out here. Democratic National. It's what USAID is part of it, and there's other nonprofits that are. It's the government.
John, is it the National Endowment for Democracy?
Democracy. There it is.
NED.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, the National Democracy. So they've sponsored a lot of folks going in, but you'll also see that the color revolutions kind of followed these things. In Venezuela, they tried to do it. In Ukraine, they did it. And that was how they were able to get to 2014 coup against. It started out with, we're concerned with democratic things. We want people to have a better life and women's rights and things like that. And sometimes they use those issues, and it seems great. I mean, they're getting they're young people and other folks that didn't have a job. Now they're going to get this job and training, and they're going to do some good things for a while and build that trust, that public trust from the people. And then all of a sudden, but hold on, they're being used for a color revolution. So and people, of course, they're gonna, if you're in need, you're gonna be happy to get something back. But if it means regime, if it's helping regime change, then what you've gotten back is going to be taken away in spades. So anyway, that's if you look at the politics of the USA things, there's always a divisive thing that goes on there. That's dividing a grouping against. I think I tried in Bolivia too. They had the USAID forces that were going into Bolivia after Bolivia's native. Whatever his name was, he was the first indigenous president in Bolivia, and he was doing some great things.
Evo Morales.
He was improving the situation of economic situation for the poor and things, and he was making some he was making things like Venezuela, the ALBA things, where, okay, well, you give us oil, we'll give you rice, and these mutual beneficial things that were really helpful. But then there was the nonprofit grouping that was telling folks in Bolivia that the indigenous population, their lands are being taken away from, and they're not getting enough rights. So there was this whole division thing going on against him, and you're wondering, well, where'd that come from? Well, the money comes from the U.S., but the money's not going to pay for nothing if they're not going to get something from it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. I just wanted to throw in to add that AID and the CIA were kind of hand in hand for Southeast Asia and the Vietnam era. AID was the soft power that was not so soft in its association with all things war and devastation. So I mean, their mixed reputation, of course, is based on a certain realpolitik reality that was incredibly destructive to the people of Southeast Asia, no doubt. So I mean, I don't know. I'm so ambivalent about it. When I see, having known so many people in the AID world, as having been a Peace Corps volunteer to this day, I know dozens and dozens of people, really awesome people who are, intent about cultural understanding and sophistication and sensitivity and language and all those great things that, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I learned how to do all that, was all connected to that network of people. And when I think about these people being, laid off willy-nilly, right, left, and, the Peace Corps could be gone in a second, unless they'll call it the Trump Corps or something like that. It's disturbing for me to see that, because again, there's a subtlety about this kind of dismantling. Well, not so subtle actually, but taking apart the good with the bad, I think, is what's really, really devastating in this scenario right now. I'd rather have seen AID evolve into something better, not dismantled and become some horror show. And I think the scary part is that as the U.S. soft power recedes, they're right there. They will fill the void. The Europeans will be there too. They've always been. But we won't be. And that there has been an economic advantage to having AID out there, distributing money in the way that they have. So we're going to lose all that, and we're going to lose a lot of that goodwill, and that's really, really disturbing, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you both. I'm going to defer. I raised my hand to call on myself, but I'm going to defer to Dave Clennon, and then I'm going to check the chat. Dave, there's a reference to the film State of Siege. What? I'm really blanking. You appeared in a film in the Latin American context. What was that, first of all? This is just...
First of all, the name of that film was Missing.
Oh,
and
yes.
that was a film that tracked the overthrow of Salvador Allende. And the other film that you mentioned, State of Siege, was a prior film that I believe was shot in Chile, although it portrayed events in another Latin American country. And State of Siege was not an English language film. And I'm not familiar with the whole history of that film, but some people remember that a United States CIA agent was killed by urban guerrillas in I'm not sure which, might have been Uruguay, and so it showed how this CIA officer had supervised and trained people to engage in torture and other counterinsurgency activities.
Right. Thank
Long
you.
answer, long answer,
No.
short question.
Well, I got you onto that tangent, but I was free associating with your film career and these issues. But and there's some more detail on this that McGregor has put in the chat for everybody else. So go right ahead, Dave, with your contemporary question.
Well, now that you've rattled me, how about I defer to you for your question and rehearse my question while you're
All right.
engaged in dialogue with John.
Good. Well, it's two parts, John. First of all, I put in the chat, I just published a piece on the TikTok ban, which of course was motivated by fear of China, which had no legal basis. This fear of China gathering data on Americans through TikTok, and so the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously upheld the TikTok ban that prevented 170,000 Americans from using TikTok. It seemed to me, and the chat in the chat, I have the link for my legal analysis of why the Supreme Court was wrong about that. But I wanted to turn it into a question for you. Are we in a new Red Scare? Are we in a new period? You know, fear of China figured in McCarthyism, and Joe McCarthy thought he was exposing the members of the State Department who were favorable to China. And I'm inviting you to link that era to the new Red Scare we're experiencing with the boogeyman of China, and give you an opportunity to discuss that as well.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry. Trying to get my my thing back here.
You're okay. You're okay. We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Sure.
I was trying to unmute. I'm muted. Yeah, it's really scary. The Red Scare. And it's scary what McCarthy did and everything, and not allowing people to express any kind of thoughts that that are not against, that threaten the ideology of capitalism and individualism and all that kind of stuff. Anything that does that, anything that tries to help build a movement that empowers working people, that's for unions and all those kind of things. And in ideologies, especially ideologies during that time, when you know so many advances were being made in the Soviet Union, and folks were saying, "Hey, well, you know, why aren't we getting these? Why can't we get some of these advantages?" And there was a big union movement and things like that, and so they felt like they had to stop it. And anytime they feel threatened, it's the right of free speech, which they say they have. And we talk about social media and TikTok, they're taking it away, so you can't. And it seems a little bit more scary now because you had McCarthy in that and doing all that thing, but he didn't have such a powerful placement in the government. Elon Musk is now like, he's kind of like the vice president. He's supposed to be part of this DOJ, DOG grouping of that same, but he's got a lot of influence. He's a $400 billion billionaire or something, and he's got all the social media. He's got SpaceX. He's got X, social media X, formerly Twitter. And he's like one of the most prominent figures right now. He has a lot of 100 million people that are his followers and things. And but he's also he has these companies, SpaceX and these other things, and he's able to influence spending that's going to benefit his businesses. So there's no, they don't say there's any conflict of interest, but there's a huge conflict of interest, and he's very dangerous um, because this is someone who supports the Alternative for Deutschland Party in Germany and the British Reform Party, which are openly fascist organizations. And if people didn't think that he was who he is, you saw that salute that he made, you know. And then he didn't, he tried to say he didn't do that. And then he went on X on his social media and said, well, yeah, so made a joke about it's not, he didn't Nazi time or something like that. He said something like that. But the things that he's done, and then you look at the other people in the Trump administration and the things that they've pushed. This one guy, Vance's, who um, he was working with Vance. I can't remember his name, but he's somebody who said he wants a position in the government. Who's Trump's Trump ally, and he says, if you want to get things done right, you got to do it with a white man. Otherwise, it's not going to get done. And just
Right.
the whole kind of stuff that's going on. So that's what makes it kind of scary. At that,
Yeah.
pushing this, there is no freedom of speech or anything like that. So how do you fight that? Well, you just keep on speaking and let them. Enough people let's do it together. We're going to say what we need to say. You're going to put us in jail. Okay, well, you're not going to be able to put everybody in jail. If we stand with each other and don't allow ourselves to be isolated and build and right now everybody's threatened us, but the target starts with Black and brown people, immigrants, and then it's going to be the targeting, the bombing of Somalia, the other kinds of things against the African people there and African people here. So those folks are going to want to do something, and so it's
Right.
up to everybody else to join that movement, join that solidarity, and pretty soon it'll be like Nixon. Nixon was when Nixon was, he was a reactionary guy, but the movement in Vietnam was so powerful. And he saw people, he's looking in his window, worried about because the Vietnam movement was strong. And he started giving up. He started making it look like he was a better person. What is it? Housing, Section 8 housing, and some progressive legislation came out, not because he was a nice guy, but he was scared. So we're going to do the
Yes.
same thing.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think what we're emphasizing, and why I brought it up in a historical context, there's not a lot of imagination among autocrats and authoritarians. They keep going back to their old tropes, and it was the China lobby that Joe McCarthy was railing against, and we have these shiny objects and boogeymen that they trot out, and they're doing it. They're doing it all over again, which is with China today. There's so much more to be gained by cooperation and trade agreements and all the rest, and tariffs go in the opposite direction. So let's keep going. Dave, did you pull back from raising your hand? I didn't.
I did not intentionally pull back. I think.
Go right ahead. You're next.
Okay, yeah, that was my algorithm. So I just want to say that I think that the opening of the books for the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has been helpful and has revealed a lot of what has been going on that we were not really aware of. by USAID. And one of the things that came out was that, and you can look at Radio Free Europe has an article about this. About 90% of Ukraine's mainstream media
Mhm.
were underwritten by USAID, and now they're scrambling to stay afloat right now. And I thought that was an interesting revelation. So it's not a bad thing, in my opinion, to look at the books of USAID and see what they're doing. And my personal opinion is that USAID is one of its main roles is to change regime change countries that have governments that the U.S. doesn't like. It's soft power, and that led to the overthrow of the Ukraine regime in 2014, the elected Ukraine government. So my question, long comment, my question for John is about an interview that Marco Rubio gave recently with Megyn Kelly, in which he admitted that the world is no longer a unipolar institution, or there are more. It's become a multipolar world, and I thought that was a remarkable admission on the part of our Secretary of State. And I wanted to ask John if you could comment on the relationship between the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, the relationship that has been growing between the two of them as they confront the American empire.
Yeah, yes. It's interesting how there's a Soviet Union, and then there was a collapse of the Soviet Union. It wasn't voted on, but it was a collapse of the Soviet Union with the help of the U.S. and things. Um, um, and it started out with just basic oligarchy, taking everything, all the things that were produced by the labor of the people from the Soviet Union. I don't want to say just Russian, but it's a big place, a lot of nations there. And so all that built up stuff was just kind of taken. And then the economy was so bad and people were suffering. And so then it had to stop. So I think one of the things that Putin was trying to do was, okay, I'm gonna be the between the oligarchs and the working class, and try to make some kind of stability or something going on. So there was more things that were going to be nationalized. And one of the things I remember is that, at first, they wanted to be, I think the folks who had the collapse of the Soviet Union, those folks, they wanted to be imperialists like the U.S. Come on, we want to be part of that on the table, but they didn't get. They didn't take the invitation. They didn't allow them to do that, and all they did was continue to increase the economic competition against them and other things. And so Russia had no choice. They were either gonna go down and be taken over or something like that, or they were gonna join the anti-imperialist movement, the anti-U.S. imperialist movement, with and be in more relations with the Latin America, and do some things that were more beneficial for those relationships. So they became the BRICS countries and other things like that. So it was in their interest. It was in their interest to be closer to China, And I remember Putin said something about that the economy in China, he said, and nationalization, he was saying maybe we have to do more like China's doing. So I don't know if he's going to do that or if they're going to do that or whatever, but it's definitely, they see it's in their interest to fight against a common enemy. And in that struggle, they're doing things like giving South Africa free grain when they couldn't get the grain because of the Ukrainian war. It was making it hard for the African countries to get things. So maybe they gave some of them for free. So those relationships are that way. You know, for whatever reason, that's why they're gonna. And I think it's gonna continue, especially the more Trump gets stupid, does things that really don't make any sense. Um, he's going to, you know, he's just going to push them further against the U.S.
All right. Let's, Robert, with deference, I'm going to choose someone who hasn't spoken yet. And Anthony, if you'd briefly introduce yourself, joining us now,
Hi
and
there.
then go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you for calling on me. I'm really sorry I had to be late this morning. Some things came up. I'm Anthony Manousis. I'm with Making Housing and Community Happen. And I just wanted to just share some of my thoughts and get your input, John, because I know you're very knowledgeable about this. My impression of foreign aid is that it's, especially with superpowers, it's always been about the self-interest of the country giving the aid, not just humanitarian reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So when China builds roads and infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
in Africa and other places, it's always with the idea that this is going to benefit them economically.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, the United States has mixed motives, and foreign aid has often been tied to just the things that David Clennon was talking about. But that being said, since we live in a perfect world with imperfect motives for doing things, foreign aid, whether it's by China or the United States, has helped a lot of people. It has benefited millions of people, preventing deaths and so forth. So what I'm seeing, and I would like your take on this, is that the Trump administration is moving away from using humanitarian aid as a political tool to advance the interests of the United States, and relying almost exclusively now on economic warfare.
Yeah.
Using sanctions and using not boycotts, but tariffs and other
Mm-hmm.
economic weapons to enforce their will. This is both offensive to me morally speaking, but I think it also has some serious political drawbacks. So what's your take on this, John? Am I on the right track, or do you have some other thoughts you'd like to share about the uses of foreign aid?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And every country, they want to, okay, I'll give you something, but I want to get something too. So that's one thing that the African countries, if you ask them how do they feel about the Belt and Road projects and things like that, and are they kind of getting something from it? And they'll say, yeah, but so are we. And so they say that Belt and Road projects are supposed to be mutually beneficial and stuff, and that seems to be true to folks. But the U.S. doesn't. They just, and now I don't know if they're just more desperate now. They see the cliff or something, so they're just gonna take everything they can right now. um, but but by doing this kind of thing, not allowing anything, it has to be for us, not for you. Who does it hurt? That you're going to have these tariffs that increase inflation like crazy. Inflation is already very bad, and they're going to make it worse. They're already making it worse with these tariffs and things like that. And then you're not going to allow the government to function in a way to meet basic necessities from people and agencies that are supposed to give social services. They're cutting back money from that, and so working people are just going to suffer like crazy quickly, and they already are really with some of these things. So especially deported persons, but so I think it might work for a second, but it's not gonna work too long because there's not going to be people aren't gonna consent to this type of behavior that destroys their life, so their quality of life so quickly. They can see their neighbors. I mean, undocumented people and teachers, they see their students are afraid to come. Parents are afraid. They don't know whether they should send their kids to school or not because they're afraid they'll be deported. The parents will be deported. So they see. I mean, I'm looking at my neighbors around here, and I know there's some that are near my place right here, a couple doors down. There's folks there that I might see the ICE coming over there, and so you see it so quickly. So yeah, I think it's not going to work. And yeah, okay, China gets lithium, it needs lithium, it needs cobalt, it needs those things, but it's also giving infrastructure. And the US gives nothing but debt.
Yes. Thank you, John. And thank you, Anthony. I think the analysis has to include, not using a sledgehammer on an agency that may be both doing good and doing ill. I mean, it takes a scalpel to recognize which programs are actually helping people on the ground with food and aid and other assistance, and other programs which are really being used to advance American foreign policy. And so that's a subtle task, and cutting off all foreign aid doesn't address it with the care that it requires. I think that's the point that Anthony and others are making.
Oh,
Uh,
I should also say though that
yes.
talking about the aid that I mean UNRWA, the United Nations aid that was vital for people to not starve to death, and the U.S. just cut the aid with no evidence of there being any Hamas people there. In fact, when they cut the aid, the State Department said, "Well, we're looking forward to getting the evidence," but they just cut it off, and it's still cut, and it's just the people are suffering. And the United Nations, the person in charge of the UNRWA, was saying, people are going to starve if the U.S. doesn't start giving money doesn't stop the aid. And that's the Democratic Party that started that. And then of course Trump's going to make things worse, but both parties are really complicit in this and collaborating in this denial of aid. If there is some good aid, that things that are going, but I think that's what Trump doesn't like. Even if a little bit is good, but it's taking in the long run, it might be he doesn't care about the long run. I don't want you to do any kind of good. No, just take that bread out of that child's mouth. He's just he's just evil.
Yes, yes. All right, let's turn back to Robert. Go right ahead.
You're muted.
Hi. It's no secret that Elon Musk has interests in China. Half of his manufacturing base is based out of China. He has a multi-billion-dollar investment there. And so, of course, there's technology transfer that goes between Tesla and their Chinese manufacturers. There's issues about natural resources for making batteries, between China and Tesla and Elon Musk. And now we have him sitting right to the right hand or on the lap of the president. So what is it's kind of another kind of brain twist that we have this connection where there's an economic incentive globally to have Tesla creating jobs and creating manufacturing in China. Yet at the same time, now which what's your thought on that?
Yeah,
One-third
yeah.
ounce.
It's really complicated with Tesla. I mean, is he helping by having this Tesla thing in China? Is that I'm sure there was a benefit from some of that. But if he's going to be on the board with Trump, trying to destroy China's economy with 100% tariffs and things like that, I don't know if he's going to be, because one thing about the capitalists and billionaires and other folks in China is that they are on a leash. Um, and some of the folks have done things, and the billionaires and companies, and they did some corruption stuff going on, and they were punished for it. They had said, no, you can't. No, yeah, yeah, I forgot the name of that other thing. But the other thing too is that the transfer of information goes, um, but it's not always that way from the U.S. there. Many times, and now science is China has developed, has created a lot of sophisticated advances that the U.S. didn't even know. That's that DeepSeek AI is just passed over. It's more capable. It's faster. It's 10% less, 10 times less the cost. The U.S. said no. We're not gonna let you have these NVIDIA chips. We're not gonna let you. So they used the older chips, and they figured out a way to make it more efficient, and they just blew through. And then they gave it to the world on open source. So all of the profits of the AI folks is just going to go down because you can't compete with that. And why did they do that? That's interesting. Why would China? Because they could have made a lot more money. They had a superior product, and it's AI. They could have, but they chose to just give it away and give it to the world. So yeah, it's hard to be. So that Trump's got to be Trump. Elon Musk must be worried about that because his Teslas, the Tesla, the electric companies, the electric cars in China are mostly from Chinese companies, and they seem to be superior, and they're cheaper. And the batteries that are being developed in China right now are superior and less cost. They don't require the minerals that are more rare. So I don't know. That doesn't answer your question much, but
That's okay. It's complicated. No doubt.
Just a factual question, John. Does the Trump tariff on China raise the price of Tesla automobiles or parts?
Oh, I'd assume it would. I guess.
Yeah.
I guess
So that's going to come back.
I suspect there's going to be a carve out for that.
A Musk exception to the tariff.
Musk exception.
Exceptionalism. Tesla exceptionalism. We are joined by Carol Francis Likens. Just to put that in the minutes here at 9:14 a.m. Carol, you were kind enough to invite John, and you will see on the recording of this program that we've had a stimulating conversation. I just wanted to open, before I go back to Dave, if you had a question or a comment or wanted to focus why you encouraged us to invite John. You're on mute.
Is that a cue for Carol Francis?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Briefly, as soon as she unmutes. The
Okay.
unmute button. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Carol.
It keeps going away. Yeah. Here's my comment. Is it last night I forgot it was Thursday, so I didn't set my alarm clock. And I was sitting here in the morning saying, what do I have to do today? Oh my God, it's Friday and John's speaking. Oh. Okay.
Okay.
But I am looking forward to the video because I'm sure it was great, and I'm glad, John, that you were able to talk to my people on ICUJP, and I will be listening to it. And yeah.
All right. Thank you, Carol Francis, again. Dave, go right ahead. We have a few more minutes before we
Okay,
close.
quick question for John. It appears to me that China is an unparalleled economic powerhouse right now, and that their face, as they face the rest of the world, they're looking for business opportunities. And so when they come to a country in Africa or Latin America, they are thinking, let's do business. Let's do things for each other that will be mutually beneficial. And the United States goes into a country and says, we before we do business with you, we'd like to change the way you govern yourselves. And USAID is just one part of that, along with the U.S. military. So, so my one question is that your impression too, that China is looking for commercial opportunities around the world, and the United States, the U.S. empire, is looking for something more like domination? That's one question, but which I hope leads into this question. What is going to happen with Taiwan, and what is going to happen in the South China Sea? And how is the United States preparing for a military confrontation rather than an economic confrontation? And what would happen if the United States were to attack China or to take some kind of military action in Taiwan? Because one impression I have is that the U.S. wants to make Taiwan another Ukraine as they face off with China. Thanks.
Yeah, it's interesting that in the Russian intervention, I call it an intervention because when I went to Ukraine, I went to the Donbass region and stuff, and Lugansk folks and all there, and I found out, I heard about the horror that they were going from 2014 over, and the thousands and thousands that were killed during that time after the U.S. Had the coup, and they trained and helped Nazi forces like the Azov Right Sector and many others became the police and the military, and their job was to really terrorize the people in the Donbass region. And so they were pleading, say, hey, we need help. And I feel like, damn, what we saw in Gaza, what we're seeing in Gaza right now, I think that would have happened. That would have happened in the Donbass region if it wasn't for the assistance that they got. But now I lost it.
So is Taiwan going to
right.
be next
So that's
Ukraine?
the connection. Yeah, the Rand Corporation, that tells you about it. It's a think tank thing for the ruling class, and they have little plans and things. And like 3 years before that happened in Ukraine, before the intervention, they had already played out. Okay, what are you going to do to provoke an action from the U.S. from Russia? And they said, the tactic is, okay, if you want to get NATO closer and things, you're going to have to go to Ukraine and do some things to provoke. And that's what we're seeing in Taiwan right now with the military exercise that the U.S. is doing, the shipments that they're saying that, oh yeah, we think, like China said, that that Taiwan, it's a one China thing, but they don't act like that. They don't act like that, and they're training, guerrilla actions on what to do, giving the weapons and things. So they keep going more and more and more and more provocative. So I think maybe they think that this is gonna, like with the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, maybe this is something that's gonna push them into Ukraine. Maybe they can try to make folks not like them as much, or be bogged down in a war and things. It seems pretty risky. It seems pretty, especially, and if they're thinking about in the South China Sea, they're going to do this, but the company, the country, South Korea and other countries, even Philippines, even Japan, the trading partners are with China. So they would have to really almost like slit their throats to be in such solidarity with the United States when it's going to hurt them so bad right now.
Right.
The investments increase.
As I have one final question on human rights, but Rose, I see your hand. Go right ahead.
Muted.
Yes, I can't find the hands up button. I don't know why. I just wanted to come back to China. I know it's a very short time now, but if anybody doesn't know the writer, Peter Hessler, Hassler, he's a journalist who did Peace Corps in China, one of the very first people to do Peace Corps in China. And then he went back, I've seen him back a few times, and his books are so interesting because they're like an American view of what was going on in China then. I mean, I'm thinking back to the very beginning when John was talking about how much China has changed. My son also did Peace Corps in China, and so I've been over there to visit a few times. And I just want to say, the press here always, and this isn't Trump, this is from way before, has always been so negative about China. And when you get there, it's actually a really nice country. There are all sorts of really good things going on. And I think because people don't go there, and I didn't go as a tourist particularly, I mean, obviously I was, but I went with somebody who speaks the language and had a lot of friends there. Incidentally, his students, he did Peace Corps, oh God, 8-9 years ago now. And almost all his students that he's close to are now living all around the world using their English skills that he worked on to kind of, with Chinese companies. It's just amazing. They're just everywhere. He goes anywhere he goes, he seems to bump into one of his ex-students. So that's just a vision of it. There's something else I want to say too, and I've lost it. Oh yes, and I've recently been in Vietnam, which is right next to China, and that was also very interesting because the roads there, a whole new set of roads going right through the whole country, and they're coming from the Chinese border. So my thinking, or their thinking, is that all these roads are being built by China as part of their expansionist thing. Not very many cars, they're freeways with no cars on them. It's quite extraordinary. Anyway, that was just kind of like a tourist view. I'm sorry, but I thought it was interesting to bring it to
Yeah, I got something to say about that.
Well, John, just hold your thought. We'll combine that.
There's my Vietnam. One of my comrades just went to Vietnam, and we got this hat from him.
Yeah. John, one second, because I think, and unfortunately we should have raised this earlier, Amnesty International has identified human rights violations in China regarding the Uyghurs, censorship, strict censorship on and offline, policies and programs contributing to the destruction of Tibetan culture. Women's rights activists are concerned about human rights violations. So I think we have to temper the accolades by some recognition, and then what is the role of NGOs and others to focus on human rights violations in China?
Yeah, it's always going to be some contradictions with what people do. But the first thing I think you have to do is verify whether these things that the U.S. State Department is saying. And unfortunately, in Amnesty International, they get caught up in the war drive sometimes. They said, the Iraq weapons of mass destruction, they were on the page. they're on the page. They said, "Oh, okay, it was true," and then they said, "Oh, well, we didn't have the right information." So a lot of times, and that's happened many times. So you can't depend on what they're saying. You got to go there, and it's easy to go to the Uyghur, right? It's easy to go there. The China invites folks to go and see for themselves, and we also know the Dalai Lama was he was a tyrant, man. You look at him and he'll you can't look at him over there. And the fact that he supported the Bush war against Iraq, and he has very close ties with the CIA. So you just got to look at these things and not assume, even if Human Rights Watch as well, a lot of times they took the story of the thing, but sometimes they say the right thing as well. But it has to be investigated first, especially on Dalai Lama and especially on Uyghur thing that they're doing right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. In the spirit of sharing as much information as possible here, I've put in a Human Rights Watch report on China, and folks should study that as well as criticisms of those reports. I want to thank you, John. I think it's clear in the records of ICUJP that you are already a card-carrying member of ICUJP. So we've stamped and updated your membership, and it is in good standing. We're grateful to you for your perspective and the information that you bring us, and we appreciate that.